Good morning friends and welcome back to NPTEL online certification course on public speaking. Till now we have completed 4 weeks and today we are going to enter the 5th week, and in this 5th week we shall be talking about the role of non-verbal in public speaking. Now most of you might be thinking that does non-verbal have any role in public speaking? Then many of you also might be worried about, if it is so, what are these non-verbals? Because when we say public speaking, we actually mean speaking, and one speaks words, but do they also speak non-words? Is speaking only the representation of verbal repertory? I think in this lecture, which I have titled as Kinesics, which is actually one of the forms of non-verbal. But before we go to kinesics, let us talk a little bit about what are non-verbals and what do the psychologists think about non-verbals. My dear friends, one of the major psychologists named Purposeful, he actually says man is a multi-sensorial being. Occasionally he verbalizes, and we must seriously examine the implications of the fact that man does not communicate by word alone. What is the implication? The implication is that man not only communicates with the help of words, but man also communicates without words. Now, if you could recall some of the great orators whom you have listened to, you might realize that while they were speaking and making use of words, but at the same time they were not static. At times their faces had some sort of emotion. There were actually reactions on his face. At times you could find the facial expressions also changing. You could have also noticed the use of hands, fingers, fine, and of course the entire body at times. Now all these actually in one word may be considered to be non-verbal. Now what is non-verbal and what is verbal? Verbal, as you all know, is actually a sort of communication where a person uses words, but non-verbal communication is without words, that is, it actually comprises non-words. Now why non-verbal communication? Because when a person speaks, you can testify, you can verify the veracity of what he speaks with the help of certain emotions that he actually implants while speaking those words. Now what are the benefits or what are actually the hazards in non-verbal? Why non-verbal communication has got too much importance nowadays? Actually non-verbal communication is very much unstructured. When you use a particular word, you are careful that this word will have this meaning. But when you make use of non-verbals, non-verbals can be signals, non-verbals can be gestures, non-verbals can actually be the emotion that is reflected on your face. So this non-verbal can compensate for the deficiency of verbal communication. You might have found that a serious speaker, if he simply goes on speaking throughout, will you really enjoy? Perhaps not. You actually want the speaker at times to change his stance, at times to smile, at times to provide some moments of relief that he can do with the help of non-verbals. There are many speakers who are not that much good at words. Now, how he or she can compensate? Say for example, if you could have seen a mother scolding the child, the mother not only scolds the child, but at the same time the mother will make use of fingers. Remember, don't do that, fine, go there, come here. So, when these expressions are there, the mother also makes use of certain emotions which are transplanted or which are communicated with the help of some parts of the body. Non-verbal signals actually involve three categories of language, And what are these three categories? Sign language. Now, this sign language is actually some stereotypes which are very common, no? And then the other is action language. When you do some action, isn't it? When you speak and at the same time you actually activate. And the third is object language. Object language is when a person actually, apart from making use of words, when he makes use of certain objects to indicate, to show his emotion, to show his attitude. My dear friends, actually when somebody as a public speaker speaks or appears before the audience members, there are so many things that the audience members notice. Imagine a person coming in a very rugged, in a very tattered, battered dress. So, at the very first instance, you reject the speaker and develop a different sort of feeling. But a person who comes well dressed. So, the third category is object language, which actually means what a person dresses, what is his bearing, what sort of color he puts on when it comes to the selection of dress, and then even the shoes that he wears, they also indicate a lot in terms of non-verbal signals. Now, imagine a person when as a public speaker he appears and he starts speaking, the very first thing that the audience members are going to look at is his appearance. Now, many of you may also say that appearances can be deceptive, appearances can be manipulative as well, of course. But then one has to understand that when one is going to deliver a talk or a presentation or a speech, he knows the formality of the occasion, and that is why the sort of dress, other things associated with it, say for example the jewelry, say for example also if as a speaker he brings notes, they also can be a part of the overall performance of the speaker. In this regard, it is quite pertinent to make a mention of what Sigmund Freud, one of the greatest philosophers of all ages, says, and what he says is actually true of our body language. Freud says, he who has eyes to see and ears to hear can convince that no mortal can keep a secret. If his lips are silent, he chats with his fingertips. Betrayal oozes out of him at every pore. Now, what is the meaning? The meaning is that despite the fact that a person has prepared well and he tries to deliver his talk in the best possible manner, and sometimes or the other, even if he is not able to speak, but then some parts of his body keep speaking, one cannot lie for a long time, because betrayal, or if he is simply trying to overcome the sort of glossophobia that he is suffering from, so this betrayal seems to come out of him at every pore of his body. Isn't it so important? Have you not seen that when a mother scolds a little child, the mother not only uses the words, but at the same time the mother also shows the gesture either by pointing with the help of fingers when she is trying to forbid the child from doing anything, or sometimes with a stern look in her eyes she actually commands. My dear friends, as a public speaker, you too can have such a command. And not only this, your facility of having the body language can also help you gain an instant feedback from the crowd. Now, you might be thinking that we are talking about non-verbal and we are talking about kinesics. This term was introduced in the year 1952 by Ray Birdwhistell. Birdwhistell and other philosophers also say that whatever we speak, majority of it is actually a part of our non-verbal communication. And this kinesics, it is actually the study of non-verbal mode of human communication. Now, what comes under kinesics or what comes under body language? But before we come to that, let us make a mention of how non-verbal communication includes interpretation of body movements such as facial expressions, gestures, postures, gait, visible arm movements and body movements. Now, if I say that face is the index of mind, fine, a guilty mind will always have a guilty face. No, we always say a guilty mind is always suspicious. So, all these expressions or emotions, they are written over our face. Our face is actually a junction of colors. It can hide or it can reveal different sorts of emotions: sincerity, loyalty, treachery, anger, seriousness, sadness, aggressiveness, hypocrisy, I mean many more. That is why when a person speaks, we do not tend only to hear his words, but we also look at his facial expressions. Now, what can be the parts of kinesics? Not only the face, and when we say face, it has several other parts also. I mean, right from your forehead to your chin, right from your eyes to your nose to your lips to your ears, all these actually play a major role in creating these facial expressions. It is always said that even when one wants to deliver a positive message but delivers it within squint eye, message tends to be negative. We have often heard people saying that though he told me, but I don't believe what he said was true. My dear friends, these parts of kinesics include facial expressions, gestures, postures, gait, arm movements and body movements. You can always see here, and you can also compare it with some of the presentations or speeches that you have heard while the speaker making movements like these. Now, let us also deliberate upon body movements. Do our bodies make movement? Yes, our body is never static. As we have said, that even if somebody is silent, he is chatting with his fingertips. If somebody is sitting, his sitting posture also tells a lot, whether he is confident or he is withdrawn, whether he actually tries to show his tenacity or he is half-hearted, because it is said that body movements are the largest physical gestures that a speaker can demonstrate on the stage. In the very first instance, when the speaker comes to the dais or when he comes to the rostrum, he actually reveals his attitude, he reveals his emotions. The way either he smiles or poses a sort of seriousness. So, the larger the gesture, larger the impact. You might have at times found the speaker trying to come out of the rostrum and standing or making movements so that others may not have a feeling that the speaker is totally different from the audience members. Many good speakers try to maintain a sort of proper level and tries to ensure a sort of equality between the audience members and the speakers, because his main aim is to deliver home the point that he has brought with him. Now, sometimes or the other, when you find somebody sitting, you also tend to understand that it is possible to non-verbally communicate and send signals to the person at the other end of the table. You might have found that when you are delivering a talk, naturally you stand, but in which posture do you stand? Do you really make movements, or you stand quite static, just like a statue? And even when your words flow, do they also tend to have a sort of imprint on your face? During interviews, you might have seen the way a person speaks. Nobody would expect a person, especially an interviewee, to sit in such a posture that his legs fall apart. So, falling legs apart tend to give a different sort of meaning. Somebody you might have seen maintaining a military posture, somebody you might have seen crossing the legs, somebody you might have seen trying to defend himself, somebody you might have seen perhaps lost in his own thoughts with his beautiful face, relying upon his palm. All these actually tend to give a lot of meaning, my dear friend. And it is always said that the way a person sits, the way a person walks, the way a person speaks, and the way a person behaves, because non-verbal is actually a part of one's behavioral strategies. We often find that even our eyes, they denote a number of emotions. In one of the studies, it was said that our eyes can have more than 2 lakh languages. So, it is very difficult to understand what a speaker tries to say through his eyes. Nowadays, it has become very difficult, and especially in formal settings, one has to regulate his eye behavior, because with the help of his eye behavior, he can try to have a control over the audience members. Of course, the speaker may have to vary his gaze or eyes from one corner of the crowd to the other sides in order to gain the proper attention of the audience members. Now, when we talk about facial expressions, you will find that even though 43 muscles of ours under our facial skin, we are capable of producing thousands of different emotions, expressions, my dear friend. And each expression has got its own meaning, unless and until there are some cultural differences, which we have already talked about when we were discussing role of culture in public speaking. As a speaker, one actually should prepare oneself to equip a proper facial expression in order to represent a proper emotional intelligence. In this regard, it would quite be better if we can take an example from a dance performance, which most of you are familiar with. And this dance performance is Bharatnatyam, where you can find the dancer displaying all the 9 rasas only with the help of facial expressions. Now, you might wonder that how can a dance form have a sort of relevance with public speaking? My dear friends, is public speaking not a sort of performance? Does public speaking not require all sorts of emotions also at times? And that we can study when we talk about how one can create, how one can manipulate, how one can allow one's face to provide spontaneous reactions. My dear friends, spontaneous emotions, they come quite naturally. You do not have to try a lot for that. But when you have to pose a sort of facial expressions, it actually takes a lot of labor. It actually requires a lot of strategy. The speaker in a posed situation has to deliver an unintended or sometimes intended facial expressions in order to communicate. Sometimes you do not want, but still the demand of the job, the demand of the performance actually requires that. You might have found that when a speaker is declared to be nervous, how does he feel? He actually feels his throat being parched. He also at times find he fumbling for words, and then audience members can write him off as a person who is suffering from a sort of nervousness. And during this stage of glossophobia, one can find the sort of facial expressions which has got a lot of emotions, and these emotions are of insecurity, these emotions are of defeat. So, mostly when it is spontaneous, it is unintended, and this emotional experience or expression, they are written on your faces. Now, let us talk a little bit about rasa theory, though most of you know what is rasa theory. These rasas are actually gunas, and they are 9 in number, fine, and these gunas, they are the physical manifestations or the demonstrations. Traditional dance artists mostly try to express the 9 rasas through the means of kinesics or through the means of your body. Now, while I am talking about all these things, you can just try to match while thinking how you could last time see a dancer displaying all sorts of emotion. Such a sort of capability of posing intense emotions through facial expressions, it actually requires high emotional intelligence and also requires artistic talent. Of course, we are not trained. We do not have the training in how to manipulate as actors have, but then we cannot also stop our natural feelings which actually are written over our faces. Many of the orators, those who have become seasoned ones, those who have become celebrated ones, they also can gain a lot of inspiration by projecting different rasas as required while they are learning public speaking. Now, these are the 9 rasas most of you are familiar with, and these 9 rasas, which are actually representative of 9 emotions of love, of wonder, of laughter, of sorrow, of terror, disgust, anger, courage, peace. Of course, when you are speaking on general topics, you can utilize these, but when you are speaking something on a scientific, on a factual, it actually is very difficult to apply all these emotions which we call gunas or rasas. Now, you might be wondering as to how these rasas are important or helpful in public speaking. Though it is only a part of entertainment, as I have been saying, and this evocation of the rasas, the purpose actually lies in transferring the values. Purpose lies in transferring the meaning, the attitude and emotions to our spectators. The other day we talked about digressions, and these digressions were also one way of bringing back the audience when the audience feel themselves to deviate from the main line of thinking. Here you can find through these different pictures how different emotions have been displayed. How when two people, two parties talk to each other, whether they are maintaining a proper body language, sometimes they might be maintaining a body language which may appear to be very unacceptable in a different culture, because cultures vary, and with cultures variance or variations, our emotions also vary. Sometimes you are triumphant and suddenly your hands are raised. Sometimes you are taken aback, you give the message of surprise through your eyes, because eyes are the windows of the soul and mirror of the heart. Men trust, fine, men, human beings, rather at times they may trust language of the eyes, but sometimes or the other they may also be afraid of the language of the ear. And my dear friend, the entire world you can find that all sorts of commotion that are created, it is only because there is no proper coordination between what one sees and what one hears, and that is where the dynamics of kinesics actually seems to have been compromised with. Now, another important feature of body language is gesture. Now, what is gesture? Gesture is actually a sort of movement. This movement can be the movement of your arms, movement of hands, movement of standing, fine. So, studies suggest, according to Mehrabian, fine, studies suggest that only 7% communication is verbal and 93% is non-verbal. The gestures are reflected through movements of, as I said, hands, arms, shoulders and torso. The gestures can also be divided. I might here make a mention of enumerative gesture, fine, when you are talking about enlisting number, fine. We may also talk about locative gesture. We may also talk about subtle gesture. You can also talk about emphatic gesture. As a speaker, when a speaker is in the midst of the flow of his talk, he will say, my dear friends, one thing that all of you must remember, that in the entire world nothing is impossible. But remember, one has to be apprehensive of the Almighty. And when I say Almighty, suddenly my hands go up. Remember, my dear friend, public speaking is not only about speaking, it is all about practicing, my dear friend. It is all about practicing. I am emphasizing my point. Now, sometimes or the other you can find that rather sitting and talking passively, one can make use of gestures in order to communicate. There have been, at times when you are not able to speak and you try to indicate with the help of the gesture. Sometimes this parallel communication also takes place with the help of gestures, with the help of our eyes, with the help of our hands, with the help of some of the movements of our body. However, a public speaker must be aware of the cultural significance because it varies from one culture to another, as we have said. But when you are communicating across culture, because as a public speaker, it's not essential that only and only you will be talking to one person or to one culture. You may be asked to speak in different cultures. And in different cultures, the hand movements may be different. But differences apart, you may actually try to find out the commonalities. And the commonalities are, there are many gestures which are quite common. Fine. Limp hands, when somebody gives you a limp hand, you feel that it's a sort of boredom. Flat hands, fine, flat hands, so silent questions. Open hands, trust, interest, fine. Wringing hands, no, there is a sort of repentance, discomfort, tension, and then even when you shake your hands, of course nowadays it is not in the fashion because of pandemic, but then on earlier occasions when you used to shake hands, you either understood the mind of the other person while you were shaking hands. You could get a sort of impression whether the person was cordial or the person was simply try to neglect you or try to distance you. Even, my dear friends, you will remember that not only our gestures are important when we talk about kinesics and especially nonverbal, but postures are also important. Now, what are postures? Postures are when a speaker, either when he sits, bends, with the help of his torso, he actually tries to give some emotion. In this regard, what Professor Amy Cuddy through her research says, a set of bodily postures as power poses. She calls it power poses, and she says, fake it till you make it. I mean, one has actually to practice a lot in order to provide a proper posture. The study in this regard by Amy Cuddy suggests that a powerful pose before a final presentation can help in boosting one's confidence. My dear friends, at times, these power poses may lead to peak performance either by increasing one's testosterone levels, I mean the level of dominance, or at times one's cortisol when one actually gives the impression of being stressed. These are actually some of the postures you can find with the help of the body. You can find somebody having relaxed posture, somebody having serious, somebody having lost. You can try to find out the meaning. Next comes movement or the gait, which is also a part of public speaking, and in terms of body language, your movement actually plays a very dominant role. When you have to walk, should you really walk? Yes, of course. It is better, many speakers often say, that when I walk a little bit, I find a sort of equality, and that gives me a sort of ease while I feel talking to these audience members. So walk with a purpose, because your walk provides you a sort of confidence. Direct your whole body. Soldiers, hips, toe towards the audience. While you are going to deliver, you also need to understand that whether you can move forward, how much of your body should be given. No. If it is a prepared one, naturally you find that you are a little bit bent, my dear friend. You do not maintain a military pose here. You actually have to get connected with the group of listeners, and a balance of movement is very essential, my dear friends. Now, where should we keep our arms? Now, sometimes you might have found your professor or the speaker raising his hands. Perhaps he is trying to symbolize something. It is only a confident speaker who can raise his arms wide open while facing the audience members. In this regard, one Dhananjaya Hettiarchi recommends keeping an open palm. You can see here, keeping an open palm. This actually gives a sort of that how cordial he is. He actually welcomes the audience members, and he wants not to bend on the podium, and advises to have a sort of comfortable distance, my dear friend. Now, having said all this, you might be worrying about how you can make a proper balance of your body language when you are in the midst of a public speaking situation. One has to be, as a speaker, one has to be aware of kinesics, because kinesics is essential for a public speaker, and it also helps you bring a sort of amelioration in the quality of the speech on a multi-dimensional level. The proper coordination between your body and between the word that you speak, they actually help you provide meaningful messages. One has to groom one's overall personality, because it is all a question of bearing. You are received or you are returned in the very first instance when you appear. Now, here you can find that it is only 7% that are spoken words, 38% are the quality of your voice, and remaining 55% actually relate to non-verbal, my dear friends. So, before we come to wind up or wrap up this talk, let us have some tips to you as a public speaker. One must always adapt one's body to the empathy of the audience. What actually do the audience need? Do you feel that the audience members are now in a position of frustration, or in a situation where they want to take the flight or the fight? Fine. So, if you can empathize, by empathizing we mean if you can put yourself in the shoes of the audience members, perhaps you will develop a better sort of reaction. You have to maintain your eye contact throughout the talk, because this allows you to have a sort of control over the audience members. Many people have at times said that even if there are 200 people, how can I make an eye contact? Distribute your eyes from one corner of the crowd to the other, and then you will find that by distribution you will have an overall control over the entire populace. Even when as a speaker you feel tired, frustrated, dazed, it is better not to crack knuckles, not to scratch your head or eyebrows, not to twitch your nose, or even when you are standing, not to be cross-legged. Of course, walking is important, but don't pace constantly, and even do not pussyfoot, my dear friend. Do not walk like a cat. Concentrate on words, but do not forget your body. Your body has a lot to say, my dear friend, because your body has got a language. The way Shakespeare makes a mention in one of his famous plays entitled Troilus and Cressida, where it is actually a mention about Cressida, where the playwright says, there is language in her eye, her cheek, her lip, nay, her foot speaks. Her wanton spirits look out, at every joint and motive of our body. My dear friends, Troilus and Cressida were head over heels in love, but unfortunately Cressida was forced to go to the Greek camp, and there she was accepted. But then, Ulysses said, there is language in her eye, her cheek, her lip, nay, her foot speaks, her wanton spirits look out at every joint and motive of her body. The essence of all this is that whatever you do, your body speaks. You cannot beguile the language of your body, and so should all the public speakers. Remember that when they go to give a public speech, they should remember that it is actually a performance, and this performance can be successful only when they bring a proper coordination between their words and non-words, and these non-words in the form of their body language. I hope this lecture will help you analyze your own body language also, and when next time you go to deliver a talk, you will take into consideration all these things, and your speech or presentation will be better than what it was earlier. With this, let me take a leave from you, and in the next lecture we shall be talking about another non-verbal aspect, and that is proxemics. Thank you very much. Have a nice day.